morning, good afternoon, wherever on the planet you are right now. Welcome to the webinar we are organizing together with Picterra. I am going to put the presentation on hold for a couple of like 2 or 3 minutes so everybody can get in. We got already 150 attendees, so let's wait 2 more minutes until we reach all those who are interested to follow from the beginning. So give me just 2 or 3 minutes and we will start. All right, we're all set now. Those who are dropping in late might see the recording afterwards. So I'm very happy to host this webinar together with the people from Picterra. It's a great honor for us because it's a new kind of software, a new kind of approach on how to analyze the imagery. So my name is Erik de Bats. I'm at the sales team at MicaSense. Usually I live here in South America, so usually I take care of the market over here and also some other countries in Europe. The colleagues from Picterra, they will present themselves. Myself, I'm actually a biologist, but I'm already for years dedicated to multispectral and drones. So I'm going to start this webinar with a very brief introduction to our products, which shouldn't take too long. And then I will pass on the stage to Picterra because they are telling the really interesting part here of this webinar we're giving here. So if you have questions, you can mention these in the chat box. And once the webinar is finished, I will pick out some interesting questions and throw into the group and see if we can get to the answers. In case you don't receive the answer during the webinar, you will get a written answer by mail, I guess by tomorrow somewhere. So image analysis made easy using machine learning to classify multispectral imagery. So first, a small overview of MicaSense in case you don't know us yet. Well, we're actually also a startup from 2014. We're located in Seattle, in Washington, in the northwestern part of the US. And we make these sensors. As you can see here, we are now at the 4th generation of our iconic sensor, the red edge. In all these years, the optics haven't really changed. What changed basically is the firmware and the box as such. But in the meantime, we launched 2 other products, which I will show you later on. So who are our users? Usually these are researchers, universities, government agencies, and increasingly drone service providers who are really at the level that they need quality data. And that's like our major distinctive point of our sensors is like the quality of the data on which we put always so much emphasis. So our sensors are giving really accurate data, and that's because we have very good radiometric capabilities, basically because of the calibration panel that comes standard with our sensors, and also the light sensor, as you can see here, that is the most advanced one in the market at the moment. So I'm going to show you first this dual camera system, because this one is the latest option we launched actually last year. And that was because many of our users want to have more spectral bands. Of course, you want to have the best resolution and you want to have the best spectral bands. The more spectral bands, the better, many people say. So our sensors are limited in the wavelengths between the 400 and the 900 nanometers. So many of our users are already working with satellite imagery like Landsat or the European satellite constellation Sentinel. And they want to use, many users want to start working with drones now. So we added one more red edge with different bands. So here you can see we have 2 channels in the blue, 2 in the green, 2 in the red, 3 in the red edge, and 1 infrared. This is important because we chose very carefully these bands for 2 reasons. One reason is to create distinctive windows so we can really catch different information out of the imagery, and also to make all the algorithms that have been developed over the last years for satellite imagery can be implemented using our data. So many new indexes are possible. We can start working with spectral signatures, and of course, because of the very high resolution we're working with, we can combine all these and start working with object-based image analysis and artificial analysis, with the idea to extract in a standardized way information from one image or another. So once we have trained our sample, and because our data are so stable and so well calibrated, we can use these algorithms from the same field or the same area but different dates, or the same date but different areas. Yeah. The other sensor we have, and actually this is right now the sensor we sell most, or almost most. It's kind of a surprise because it's not a very cheap sensor. It's the Altum. The difference of Altum and the red edge is basically the lenses, because now we have a much greater resolution. So if you're flying at 120 meters altitude, you're going to have 5 centimeters. Very clear data because they are pure pixels. And of course, the great distinctive is the FLIR band we have here with a much coarser resolution, though since it is fully synchronized with the 5 multispectral bands, you can have quite a nice mosaic, and also with real temperatures of the scene you're flying with. So if you process the imagery in Pix4D or in Metashape, you can have an orthomosaic with the 5 multispectral bands and the 6th thermal band. Of course, it comes also with the DLS to calibrate the data and to geotag the data. The last improvement we came up with for Altum is the storage, because you take an enormous amount of data while you're flying because of the high resolution, and you have so many bands and the high overlap that is required. So until now it came with a USB key of 128 gigabytes. So in fact now you can add a limited amount of storage, because you can also add like an external hard disk to the camera if you like to. But now you can also use SD cards of 128 gigabytes, and that makes it a lot easier, right? So, small introduction into multispectral imagery. In case I think we have a quite knowledgeable public, so I will keep it short. It's just a short introduction to show the importance of the calibration of the data, right? So the light that comes from the sun partially is refracted in the sky, and the other comes to the ground, to the vegetation in this case, both the visible light and the infrared light. And the vegetation absorbs the majority of this energy, and a small part is reflected, like between 5 and 6% for the blue and the red bands, and a little bit more for the green bands, and a lot more for the infrared band. So this fraction of absorption and reflection of the light of the vegetation is something that's constant. It's independent of the intensity of the light. So what we want to do is to capture the data, and that each value of a pixel represents the reflection of the light, or the absorption. It's the same. It's a percentage. And therefore, we have a light incidence sensor, so we can measure in real time the intensity of the sun, and we have the calibration panel. So here you can see the typical graph of the reflectance of a vegetation. As you can see in the blue and in the red, the values are really low because the plant uses that energy to grow and reflects much more, a little bit more the green. That's why we see the plant green. And this part, which is non-visible for us, is the infrared part. And this jump in reflection is really interesting for us, because here is where we can start differentiate better between what's happening into the plant. So the activity of the chlorophyll, but also make a difference between different species and growing stages. So the more bands we have in this part, the better. So for the dual system, for example, we here have now 3 bands, right? And each plant in each growing stage and each species has a distinctive line. This is a very simplified one, right? But each feature in an image has a spectral signature. That's important. So what can you do with all these bands? Because we just don't add all the bands just because we want a lot of bands. We do that for a reason, right? So the first is the coastal blue band. That's interesting because it's good to qualify aquatic plants, and they indicate what's mixed with water. This is our usual blue band. And then we have this extra green band. It's relevant for plant physiology studies, like indices like PRI are used to that. There are very interesting pages on the internet that list the whole amount of indexes you can generate depending on the band you have. And the better your band is defined and the smaller it is, the more precise your data will get, right? So the more precise indices you can make, but it's also true, the more exact you need to work. So that's why the more bands you get, the more important it even gets that your data are well calibrated, right? So this is an example of a spectral signature. So here you can see for grass, bare soil, plastic film, ledges, forest, they all have different lines, and the more bands you have, the more specified it will be, because here you compare it with a Landsat band, and here you compare it with a hypospectral sensor. So you can definitely extract more information from the image. So how do we extract that image from that information from the image? Those people who work with satellite imagery, they know that to do that on a pixel base, and if you work with indices, it's also based on pixels. But in fact, each object consists of many pixels. So the reason to classify distinct pixels is getting less interesting, in fact. So that's why we asked our friends from Picterra to show us how you can work with this very high spatial and spectral information to extract information that's of interest of ours. So this is here ends the introduction of MicaSense. At the end of the presentation of Picterra, I will come back and I will moderate the questions. So now I will give the floor to Stefan Restani, and he will give you an introduction on Picterra.
Hi there. So before Stefan jumps in, I will just briefly do an introduction of generally about Picterra, and then Stefan will go into a concrete application use case from data coming from MicaSense. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, MicaSense generally, for co-hosting this webinar. That's great to have this kind of combination between the data and then the analysis of the data. I wish that every people coming to our platform would have data from MicaSense. That would make things much easier, I really believe. So just 2 words on myself. So I'm Frank, so one of the co-founder and the CTO at Picterra. So we are a Swiss-based company. For us, it's the afternoon today. And we've been founded in 2016. And really, basically, our goal is really to democratize this usage of AI and machine learning for geospatial imagery. We try to put that in the hand of the largest audience possible. So I will briefly introduce you our self-serve platform that really allows you to extract in the end information from your imagery. All that is cloud-based, and it doesn't really require any specific coding or machine learning expertise. So yes, exact. So just briefly to put back things in place, you know that well that I mean it's quite easy to get flooded of data. I mean when you are a drone service provider and you collect gigas and gigas of imagery. The same on the satellite side. I mean we are seeing that also exploding. There's more and more constellations. We have really this huge amount of data, quite rich in information. And now the trick is really, how can we really manage to automatically extract the information and do that in a repetitive manner that is very often tedious and also involves quite a lot of competencies. So when you want to really do all that by yourself, there's all the aspects around the data engineering, data handling, cleaning up the data and formatting it for the machine learning setup, and then having all this machine learning expertise, without mentioning then the infrastructure, the IT infrastructure you would need that would have to kind of scale depending on the project or the of the data you want to process at some point. So what we really propose there, it's really something that is auto-scalable, that allows you to really start on your own, if I can say. So you bring your competence, you can start to build and really create your models, then deploy these models. We have quite an intuitive UI that allows you to do that. And then also in terms of cost, you can really quite easily follow that, anticipate the cost, so that really scale with the usage. So you start with a very low package, and then you can go ahead. So there's no upfront investments. You really benefit also from a library of base detectors. I will mention this a bit more. So you're not starting from scratch. So you leverage a little bit the detectors and the models we have, and then you adapt them to your needs. And then finally, as I was mentioning, so the infrastructure is really scaling, and you only really require, the only required element in the end is your browser, and you can do everything from there. Then if you want to go further and integrate this, Stefan will also mention that there's different ways you can actually integrate that in your workflow from third-party softwares or through our API. So in terms of technology, at the core, it is the idea that you can, on one hand, handle different type of data sources. So if, for instance, imagery coming out from MicaSense, that you can then directly upload, but also leverage the fact that you may have some image servers available. So you may have your data on an ArcGIS server, for instance, and so you can very easily connect that to the platform. You can also basically order or search archive imagery to complement the data you have. You may want to have more data or different resolutions and be able to complement your drone data. Then you benefit really from this interactive training of deep learning models, because that's always the problem, is when you start to build a model, you never really know in advance how much data you will need in order to have something robust enough. So the idea is that you go ahead in an iterative way and you see along the way how the model performs and if you need more. That's really this idea that you very quickly have a model on which you can also set up some filter, some different settings, and you can do sometimes in very few iterations have the accuracy you need, and that you can just deploy that to all your data. So I mentioned just before this pre-trained base detector library. So what is this? Is the idea that you will basically start from one of the model that we have already pre-trained on a lot of data, and you will basically adapt it. We call that in machine learning fine-tuning. You will adapt it to your type of data. So it could be either specificities from your geography or from the resolution. You don't really need to specify that, but you will need just to provide a little bit of example. But you don't need then a huge amount of data to start to have a model that is working efficiently. So that's really this idea that you benefit from really a wide range of categories. I mean, that goes, you see, through a different sets of industries, of applications. For instance, in the agriculture, we have a base detector for saplings or weeds. And so if you're starting to build something in this category, you can start from there. And that will save you quite a lot of additional time. On the side of the data sources, that's something that we really recently released, this idea that you can actually search through satellite archives, that you can order a new image. So if you want to have, for instance, an image taken every week over an area of interest, that's something you can do in a few clicks. You don't need anymore to go through different providers and check the requirements, etc. So that you can fully do it through the platform. And the idea is that you don't only get this fresh data coming in, but you can also automatically run one of your detectors from your library, and it will basically directly process the image as soon as the image is available, and you get then the output there that you can directly check out. And so it really shortened the time between acquiring the data and getting the output. We have partnered with some of the main satellite providers, and we could really make it automatic thanks to partners like Skywatch, who have a programmatic approach to buying and searching through imagery. If you can just come one slide before, Stefan. Sorry for that. Thanks. Just one example I wanted to add, that something that could nicely complement, for instance, agriculture applications. You can also directly connect Sentinel imagery. So it's an imagery that was mentioned by Eric before, that some of the bands are similar to the MicaSense sensors. So that could be a nice way to, for instance, have some of this data complementing your area of interest, and then see some relations between what was taken by the drone and the MicaSense sensor, and then Sentinel. So regarding this creation and this training of models, the idea, as I was mentioning it, is that really to go interactive. So you can start to iterate around the model. So you give first a few examples that you can just draw. It's good to mention that you can also very easily import just in a click data that you may have already manually annotated. So we often see that people have already done reports and maps, and they had quite a lot of data there. And now they can really start to build on top of that. They will for some of them have directly models ready, let's say, by importing some of their annotation from previous projects, and they can start to very easily apply it to other images, other projects. Training a model, doing an iteration takes around 10 minutes, so it's quite quick that you can see preview outputs and see how much is needed further to get certain accuracy. In terms of accuracy also, that's something you can follow if you're more interested in localizing objects or really in segmenting, so getting the shape. There's different scores there that you can follow, so you'll see, Stefan will show you that. And then what we often see actually is that in few iterations, people start to quite quickly end up in the range of 90-95% accuracy, and definitely in the counting. In the shapes, that's something more tricky. That depends really on the configuration of the objects, but then it's really decided you can follow, and you see if you need much more data to reach the accuracy you need. Let's have a look at some applications and use case quite quickly before Stefan shows you really a more in-depth one. So we have really a variety of applications going on our platform. So in that sense, we're really a tool. So anyone can start to build a detector. So you used to say that if you can see it on your image, you will be able to create a model to detect it. This is still something that applies. We have people going for very high resolution, like even millimeter resolution that applies, for instance, for road cracks. You will have things more in the range of agriculture with plants counting. We have trees with fallen trees, for instance, or just counting of seedlings of trees. And then things a bit more at large scale that then start to overlap between aerial and satellite, being it cars, containers, roads, or things like livestock, for instance. So anything that is observable from an airborne platform in an image is something we can handle. So that's just an example to show you concretely the detection and the mapping really of an informal settlement that's in Tanzania. That's an interesting one because it's quite difficult with all these building roofs that have really a varying signature. So the roofs there are made of very different type of materials. Some will have more rust, some less. And there it's really this capacity of the model to get all that variability, but really understand the context. So really understand that buildings is in this kind of context, kind of environment surrounded by this type of ground or grass. And so that's really something that is key there, is that this model is well adapted, for instance, for these kind of geographies in Africa. And then the moment you would like to use it on a different geography, you might have to give back some additional inputs, basically. The road cracks I mentioned, what is interesting also there is that you can start to very nicely characterize these cracks. So there it was really a segmentation. So you can then extract the width of the crack. You can also get, for instance, the number of crack intersections. So for that, we've even run another detectors just for the intersection of cracks. And you can start to combine these different information to get an assessment, get an index of the road conditions, these kind of things. And that is where it starts to be useful, for instance, to integrate either using our Python library or API to kind of run that on the data, recover back the outputs, and start to do some post-processing operations. There's a very nice example that you could check actually also online that is actually also on cracks, this time on runway, and that was fully done through the safe FME software where there is a Picterra connector. and that also allows basically to deploy one of the model on a set of image and then start to do some further post-processing behind. So that's an interesting example also of this detection and localization of saplings, so very young trees just planted. This is a quite complex environment, complex terrain. There's a lot of actually of other small plants that could look alike. There's also these bark chunks that have been there, so they were cut from trees. What is interesting is that the model starts to learn then that these saplings they have to be within these rows, so these shapes you see in the image. So there is kind of a knowledge that is learned then that these saplings will be found in these rows, and then starts to discard things that will be outside. And that's something you can guide through iterations if you want or not this kind of learning from the model to be done. To show you another type of output, which is also derived from a detector of the platform. So this is the detection of vine canopies. And what you see there as an output, it's some post-processing which extracts the vine rows. And then along these rows is checking if there is a canopy or not. And so that allows to derive what we call the percentage of naked wire, so where there is missing vines. And that allows to get statistics per row, per parcels. And then you can have a full view on a domain like that of how much the density of the parcels are exploited, etc. A last example before I pass it to Stefan is an interesting one because it's really at large scale. So there was detection of slurry tanks, so that's water tanks next to farms, at the entire scale of the Denmark. So there, the idea was that there was 34,000 farms, and wanted to detect along in the neighborhood of these farms if there was water tanks or not. And so in the end, there was like 26,000 tanks detected. There was more than a terabyte of imagery processed for that. And what is very interesting there is that to build the model, that only required actually 56 annotations. So our customer actually started to build a model, did some iterations, and actually with as few as 56 annotations of these tanks, it could have a model that performed well enough to then deploy it at the scale of the country. So actually what you see there, this purple area are the farm neighborhoods. That was these areas where we run the detections, and then the green circles are actually the proper detection of these slurry tanks. So zooming out, you see a little bit this spread. There was really many farms spread all over the country. And of course, along each of these farms, we run the detector to get some slurry tanks or not at all. And finally, that's the full view of the Denmark, with the purple being all of the farms. I'm happy now to hand over to Stefan. They will showcase you a specific application with some imagery from MicaSense, and we'll be there for the Q&A after.
All right. So hi everyone, I'm Stefan Rostani. I'm a software engineer at Picterra. And today, following up what Frank showed you, I'll show you a bit how this can look like in practice using our platform. So here we have a sample data set that MicaSense has provided us. It's a lemon tree plantation. And what we'll try to do is try to count the number of trees that are in there. So the image is fairly large, roughly 3 square kilometers, 180 million pixels. So obviously you wouldn't try this by hand. And other non-machine learning algorithms might have a hard time doing this because trees are very close to each other, so segmentation can be pretty difficult. So here, what we'll try to do is using multispectral imagery to really tell each tree apart and train a machine learning, an ML model to differentiate each tree. So the first thing we'll do is to create a false color image. So here we've selected among all the bands that we have from MicaSense, we selected the red edge, green, and near infrared bands, and we've constructed this false color image using ArcGIS. It's fairly easy, and the reason we chose these bands is that they helped us really differentiate each individual tree. Because deep learning basically manipulates pixels, we need to find the bands that really help us see and tell each tree apart the best. So here we went through all the bands and tried to figure out which ones were really helping the most in this regard. Basically, we can think of Picterra as just an automated extension of our eyes. Using this image, as Frank mentioned, we can train a detector. And first question is, train a new one or start from one of the base detectors? For this example, we started from scratch, so not using any pre-existing model. We could have gone with some vegetation things, which would have helped a bit the model be more accurate, but we wanted to go from scratch here. So annotating on the platform looks like this. On the left-hand side, you can see these yellow dashed areas. These are what we call training areas. And these basically tell the model, look in this area for something. And in green, inside these areas, we tell it what to look for. The goal here is not, it's quality over quantity. As Frank mentioned, the model can perform fairly well using few annotations, but we need a varied set of annotations and of samples. So here we try to pick up areas where in different shades of light, in different colors, different states of trees, in order to have really an exhaustive data set for the model to really learn and perform well in this image. On the right-hand side, you can see these red areas are what we call testing areas. As you train the model, as Frank mentioned, you will iterate a couple of times on it. So every time you train, we will run a tiny detection in these areas, and this will let you gauge how well the model is performing. And those blue areas inside it are what the model would detect and actually detects when it runs on these subportions. For this sample, we ended up with 250 annotations, so a fair amount, but we could have done for a bunch less. It took roughly 10 iterations, and the total time to do this was, it took me roughly 2 hours of work end to end, from creating the false color image to the final detector. Most of this time was spent was me annotating, and the background training time was 35 minutes. So that's roughly 3 minutes per training.
Just maybe coming back to that, is it fine? Everyone hears me? Eric, you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Frank. You can,
good.
You can go on.
I think it stops around there, but just to say, so that at the moment we evaluate the accuracy, so you see that in blue you have what is the output, and green was what you annotated in order to assess the quality. So these blue areas are not taken in the model; they are left apart in order just to evaluate and assess the accuracy. And that's then where there's this match of, do I have an overlap between the objects that allows me to count it or not? And in this example, you see that maybe some a bit more fainted trees, you would, for instance, here miss it. And that's also where you really do these iterations. So seeing that, you may want then to add some more examples of these more fainted trees, and then rerun the iteration and adapt the model like that along the way. So to show also a little bit in terms of reporting, so at the moment you have all these outputs, so you see there on the map in the background, so that's all the detected trees. You can actually then generate different type of report. So there is on the right, you see things that are even exported to Tableau, for instance, where you see the distribution of different areas. You can see a more heat map style of detections. And then, of course, what you can do is just generate in the end a kind of a static report that you can share. So there's a fixed URL, and that's something you can share to anyone. And then at the moment you, for instance, exploit things like change detection, you can also do like what we call wave change reports, or you put the different dates you have, and then there's just an easy way to basically slide from an image to another and the detection from one to another. You can also access the platform by QGIS, S3 ArcGIS, for instance, or directly through the Python library. And of course, as I mentioned, connect any of your imagery server to the platform. That's it. Now we can move a little bit to the questions. Sorry for the sound mess. I hope you could catch, but you can catch up with questions otherwise.
Yeah, sorry for the sound. I didn't realize my mic was off.
Okay, thanks a lot, Stefan and Frank. Really interesting. This is something really new for the community. So congratulations with your job and with your company. It's really interesting.
Thanks, Eric.
Okay, so I have here a question. Can I use my own models, or can I only use your pre-trained models?
Yes, so there's a little bit these notions. Let's say there's a little bit three cases. So this is the case where you start from scratch, from zero. So you will start to draw examples, annotate on the platform, and build a model. There's the case where you want, for instance, to detect cars. So you can use the pre-trained model on the platform for that, and you will adapt it, giving but a very little amount of examples. And then there could be the case where you already have built a model, let's say on your computer. There you have two possibilities. So one is that you basically integrate the imagery and the annotations. You can import them on the platform, and that you can basically rerun a detector like that. And then if you have a very specific architecture for your model, and you want to really run it as is on our infrastructure, that's something that we currently don't do, but that we are actually going towards. So at some point, our ecosystem can also bring in blocks of different detectors. So there is a little bit of different stages. So today, if you have already trained the model on your hand, you cannot directly run it on our infrastructure, but you can import the data for that.
Thank you. An interesting question. I would have made the same question as well. When you were training the lemon trees, you don't draw the whole tree, but it's also not just one point. It's like a small vector. Why is that?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do here is detect the treetops, because that really helps us differentiate each tree individually.
It really depends in the, yeah, sorry.
Thanks. Then I have here another interesting one for about the slurry tanks. So did you use as a start more or less the coordinates of each farm? So you just detect them within these purple circles or everywhere?
Stefan, if you want to answer that.
I'm sorry. I thought the question was for Frank.
Question for the detection of the slurry tanks. If it made the detection only within these purple circles, so they gave you on already the coordinates of where the farms are, you made a circle, and then within these circles you made the detections, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that was a way to be efficient. So
it's like a mask.
Exactly. That's what we call detection areas. And so you load that, and then you run basically Detector only on that. It's a way to ensure that you do it on that, and it really minimizes also the data. I mean, that was already quite a lot of data. So that's a way. When people do large scale, often they also try to have this. If you do objects on roads, you try to have the mask of the road, for instance. The same for any linear assets infrastructures.
Okay. I have here a question. Have you ever worked with thermal imagery?
So we had some case. I mean, not that many actually, but definitely. I mean, in the end, it boils down. We had, for instance, like defects on solar panels, and there in the end, I mean, it works pretty nicely because the detector just learns about small localized anomalies. So for the detector, actually, it's an easy one. So we had some use cases like that. Then after, we didn't do things like using that for water leaks or more like soil moistures.
All right. Here is an interesting one, and I think it's about the limitation we are even here. So Lucas Fada is asking, thinking about agronomic management alternatives, is it possible to record spectral signatures for different sanitary problems, for example, 2 diseases that affect the foliage? Is it possible with MicaSense, or are these differences too fine to differentiate? So I will answer the question. On one side, yes, you can, especially if you have more bands, you can differentiate between different growing stages of plants within one crop, or differentiate between 2 different species. In that case, we can differentiate about the weeds, the bad weeds. So how to do this? In Picterra, maybe Frank or Stefan, I know you can only use 3 bands. So actually a previous work before you make a detection is choose very well your bands. Isn't that right?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, there's these things where, I mean, we have some people, for instance, that they derive like 3 indices and then they put them together, and then that's the new image, let's say, which is a combination of indices. So definitely there's a little bit this selection, which in the end makes sense because it's a way to also reduce noise, to really target more your applications, what you want to do. So it's kind of a way to really put some expert knowledge in the system, and then build the model on top. For now, it was we never really had this limitation that we couldn't put enough information in let's say 3 channels, but you have to do this pre-processing part of it.
Well, here's an interesting question as well from Christian Delgado. I think I know him from Colombia. Is it possible to work with time series inside the platform? So instead of choosing 3 different spectral bands, can you use, for example, 3 NDVI bands from different dates and put them together and use that for detection?
Again, there it's a little bit you have to use a little trick to do it, because today you cannot let's say the model know that these and these images are taken at that date, and that, I mean, because there's 2 things to that, is that you need then to bring much more data to build the model, and that's things we saw less often. But there's one nice way to do it that works well when you have a stream of data, like a WS stream of data, for instance, where you can easily play on what you output. And we did that with, for instance, a service called Sentinel Hub, where we were doing multi-temporal indices, actually. So we were really combining different days together, and then inputting that still in the end as a 3 channel to our model. And that was very efficient. So we did, for instance, field demarcation. So you would see really the different fields that basically have different growth happening at different times, doing that.
I think we have time for one more question, and that's actually very interesting because it's not one real question, but I've seen different questions about this issue, which is about the soils. So in agriculture and also for geology, the detection of features in the soil is very important. And I've seen when you opened your platform that you can choose between different applications like forestry, environmental monitoring, whatever. And apparently, as some very observing participant noted, there is nothing about soils particularly, not even for geology or also for agricultural issues like detecting whatever in the soil. Are you planning to do something specific for soil sciences?
That's good to hear. Actually, we never got that feedback, and so we will definitely have it on our list. Yeah, for now, let's say we didn't have it, let's say, much on the radar, so I'm happy to hear that. We had people doing on the archaeological side of things, where that was really involving quite some different features on the ground. But the ground by itself and things around that could be maybe erosion marks in the ground, things like that. We have seen less, and maybe what could be tricky at some point if things are too diverse around the soil, then there's no point to aggregate it together. So it's something we will have to see, and it's fine if it's not there. You can still start from scratch, and that works well. You need a little bit more data, but we'll keep an eye on that.
Okay, sorry, that wasn't the last question. This is going to be the last question from Deon van der Merwe, and I think it's interesting as well because now we are working with. I've seen the Picterra, the examples you have are mostly on man-made objects like a detection of planes, houses, cracks in the soil. And for agriculture, now we have actually used as well a very artificial tree line plantation. So what if a user wants to work, for example, with a natural forest or nature reserve and try to extract information like a tree species? Of course, you need to know the ground truth. Of course, you need to know what you're looking at. Do you have any experience of that or something you can share us about this?
Well, the first thing is that, yeah, then when you go to, let's say, outside of plantations, if it will be about counting, this is very tricky. I mean, even people with LiDAR, that's not straightforward. I mean, so we wouldn't say that it's an easy one. But then, as you mentioned, it starting to basically map the different species. It's something that people started to do at a quite high level. So, for instance, deciduous versus coniferous, dead canopy trees versus the healthy one. So there's a bit like binary categorization. These things we have seen, and that works well. So and then you really map the canopy. But it's true. I mean, going up to really a kind of accounting in the nature is something. Even when you are on foot in the forest, it's tricky.
Okay, so thanks a lot. The only thing I would like to clarify, because there are so many questions about that, is about the 3 channels that you can only use now. So people are a bit worried. So okay, I have to make different processes. I have to select the 3 most interesting bands, while I might have 10 bands. Do you have in the pipeline some development to start working with multi-layer TIFFs?
Yes, I mean, that's something we always a bit had in mind, but yeah, there was different reasons for that. I mean, also these pre-trained detectors and models, you can exploit them if you have a little bit disconnections to the same band. So there was the common denominator, but we have in mind to extend that you can manipulate more easily also the bands. For now, you can actually do that, for instance, with the integration with one of the GIS or like SafeFME, you can actually do this manipulation before. But to have, for instance, the selection of bands thanks to the model is something not there yet, and it's a little bit, the risk is with that is then you fall into needing a lot of data, so you cannot start with this. So we have to see a little bit how this fits in the whole picture. That would be
I understand.
Very nice.
It's a question of the demand. So I now have to ask everybody listening to the webinar, please ask Picterra to get more bands. All right, thanks a lot, everybody, for attending the webinar. Thanks a lot, Stefan, Frank, for your valuable information. I think it's extremely interesting, and in the coming months, years, we will hear more from this kind of technology, because what me concerns, this is the right way forward. Those who didn't have their questions answered will get a response by email, and those who are not listening us right now will receive the recording afterwards. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eric.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.